What's up, guys? Welcome to the next video in our free CSS course. Today we're going to talk about CSS Grid and how you can position items with using CSS Grid. And Grid is a really powerful tool that allows you to make like complex, or they call it two-dimensional layouts. So we already learned about Flexbox, and what Flexbox does is it basically just lets you set up things side by side really easily, but it's kind of hard to make like complex layouts like this. Doing something like this with Flexbox, you could do it, but it would be more code and kind of a pain in the butt. So to demonstrate the difference between Flexbox and Grid, I got this image here. So Flexbox, one-dimensional, really good for aligning designs that have like different rows that just have stuff side by side, which is most websites. Okay, most designs that you do aren't going to be super complicated, and they're only going to require simple side by side stuff. And when that's the case, just use Flexbox. But then you're also going to have some designs that you might come across that you have to build someday that are more complicated like this, and this is where grids come in because they just have more built-in components to easily lay out a whole page. So to give you like another example of like a real life website that probably uses CSS Grid, we're going to go to wayfair.com. And this first part right here, I can tell you right now, like this is Grid. At least these three are Grid. And then maybe it looks like this is all part of the same section. So this is probably all Grid. But yeah, doing this kind of a design with Flexbox alone would be difficult and a pain in the butt. So this is where Grid comes in. The only reason, so people up until recently, they didn't really recommend using Grid that much because it wasn't supported on a lot of modern browsers. Like not all the modern browsers had support for it for a while. So just to show you, I'm going to go to this website called Can I Use? And caniuse.com, you can use this for CSS stuff because CSS constantly gets new things added to it, just like HTML. And this will tell you like what properties you can use in what browsers. So you can just put Grid here, for example, and it knows you're talking about CSS Grid. And it'll show you like all the browsers, even the mobile browsers that support it. So as you can see, for the ones in the red mean that they don't support it, and for a while, so this was like 2017. 2000, that was 2008, 2015. So for a while they didn't fully support it, or yellow means they only had like partial support, which was like Internet Explorer, but nobody really, that's dead now. But anything red means it doesn't support it. So it used to be that a lot of the browsers for like Android mobile didn't support it, but now I haven't been to this website in a while, but now it's like 97% supported. So since the last time I was here, which was years ago probably, looking this up, half the stuff used to be red or yellow, so I didn't really want to use Grid that much because of that. But nowadays you're good to go, man. Like use Grid, it's good to go, unless you're going to develop for Opera Mini. I don't even know what that is. It's the Opera browser. I don't know what Mini is. But yeah, pretty much everything is supported now. Oh, this is recent, released October 30th, 2023. So this just got support. So for a long time, Android browsers, so like if you have like a Samsung Galaxy and you were using their browser or Chrome on it or whatever, it wouldn't support Grid. So if people made a complex website like this in Grid, it would show up broken on your page probably, or they would have to have some kind of backup for that browser, I guess. But as of making this video, November 2023, you were pretty much good to go, unless you're going to be building an app that people are going to be using on Opera Mini, which I don't even know what that is. But that was the only gripe with Grid layout, was it was only partially supported for really up until recently. So good news that we all just learned together. But again, you don't have to use Grid for everything. Like I would only use it when you're going to use complex designs. And yeah, so if you're just going to go side by side with stuff, Flexbox gets the job done just fine. But we're going to go now, and enough of me blabbering on. We're going to go ahead and jump into some code, and I'll show you the different grid properties that you'll have to know. And this is going to really be a good resource. This video is going to be good. So you might want to bookmark this if you're new to Grid and come back to it, because I'm going to cover like all the basics in this one video that you have to know, and it's going to be really good. So I'm in my file here in Visual Studio Code text editor. I'm going to add another file to this course code for the free CSS course. I have all this course code downloadable in the description off my GitHub if you want to grab it, but I suggest that you follow along with me in your text editor and code with me and make little notes and comments, and that's the best way to learn. So I'm going to call this lesson 13 grid.html. And I'm just going to make this big, and we're going to put I'm going to put all my styles and HTML just in this one little file here. I'm not going to have a separate style sheet. So just so you know, you can make a separate style sheet if you want and link it. I'm just going to call this CSS grid, and I'm going to launch this with the live server extension for Visual Studio Code. And here we are. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get rid of this stuff. Y'all don't need that, so we'll just have our page up here. Okay? Cool. So let's start doing some grid stuff here. So I'm going to go up underneath the title and the head of my HTML document. I'm going to make some style tags where we're going to write our styles. And first we'll do some HTML. So I'm just going to make like a container class. And then I'll make a grid container and another div. So this is going to be really similar to how we did the Flexbox lesson, if you followed that one. And then I'll just make some grid items. Okay. And then we'll just go item 1. And we'll make let's just make like 6 items. Okay. Cool. And then we'll just call this 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Okay, so there's our items here updating on the page. And then what we'll do is I'll add some styling to the page, and we'll make everything look prettier. And then as we go down the page, we're just going to copy and paste a lot of this stuff, so it'll be nice. So I'm going to select all with the asterisk, and then we're going to do like a little CSS reset. So say margin 0, padding 0, box sizing border box. If you don't know what a CSS reset is, go check my video on that. It is earlier in this on this course playlist. Then we'll do our container class, and we'll style that up, and we will make our container. We'll just make it like a maximum width of 1,000 pixels, we'll say, and we'll make everything centered. We'll say margin, try this again. We'll say margin 0, auto, put everything in the center. Let's make sure that's working. There it is, so that's our container. All right, and then we will do our grid container next. So go down here, we'll select .grid container, and then before I touch that, because that's going to be like our grid styling, I'm going to go ahead and add some styles to our grid items first so that they look prettier. So let's say .grid item. Okay, and we'll say that they have a padding all around of 3 rem. We'll say border. We'll give it a 1 pixel border that is solid, and we'll give it like a dark gray. There we go. And then we'll give them some background color of like a darker off-white, kind of white. We'll use F4, like a off gray. And we'll make our font size a little bit bigger. Let's go font size 18 pixels. And then we'll align all of our text to the center. Cool. All right, so this is what we have so far. We haven't done display grid yet. Everything's just in our container, and we have our 6 items here. Okay, so they're just divs, so they're block elements, and they're just gonna stack on top of each other, right? So I'm gonna go to my grid container, and I'm going to say we're gonna use the grid. We're gonna display them grid now. So with Flexbox, you hit display flex, and then with grid, you say display grid. Okay, it's not going to do anything at first. We'll say display grid. And then let's give this some, some margin top because it's like right up to the top of the page. It's annoying me. Okay, there we go. And then we're going to add something to this called grid template columns. And I'm going to say 200 pixels. 200 pixels. And 200 pixels. One for each of the, well, actually, we'll do it. Let's see. Oh, we got 6 boxes here. So we'll have to do it 6 times. Okay. There we go. So we did grid template columns and we did 200, 200, 200, 200, 200, 200. We have 6 boxes. Let's see what that did. So as you can see, it put all of our boxes side by side because we said we want a column with each box 200 pixels. So just stacked them going across. Okay. So that's how, that's basically how you do things side by side. You use that grid template columns, and then there's a bunch of ways to set how you want stuff to be, but one of them is just by using like pixels. You can use percentages, you can use whatever you want, and you can specify per each one like what you want right next to it. So we just did 200 pixels for all of them. So we could go like to this one and say 500, see what that does. So we did the 4th one, so our 4th box is now bigger. See how this is scrolling though to the side? It's because it's got to make room. Whoops. It's got to make room for that for the boxes. So that's how that scroll bar appeared. But I'll show you how to fix that. But yeah, that's grid, guys. That's how you just put stuff side by side with grid. So it's pretty similar to Flexbox, just a little different syntax. What we can do now is let's copy this down. And I'm just going to do 3 for now, just to make this look prettier. So I'll show you something else with grid template columns. So let's copy this down. Just copy that code that we had before. And we did 200. What we can do now is we can use something called the auto property. So I'm going to put auto in here. And when you put auto in, what it does is whatever box you put it for, is it'll stretch it out until the whole container or the whole viewport of the page is filled. So we're in a container class, and our maximum width is only 1,000 pixels for our container. So without it, though, if I took the container class away, this would go all the way to the side, and then this would stretch out all the way until until it was all filled. So it would be 200 pixels, 200 pixels, and then the rest would be filled in. With this item too. So that's the auto property. We can also use we can say auto for all of them if we wanted to. So let's just copy this down. Just comment it out, and you can just follow along with me and like comment stuff out. Just leave it there. So yeah, another thing you could do if you wanted to, if you wanted them to stretch, all of them to stretch equally in the container, you can just put auto for all of them, so you don't have to guess on the pixels, and that'll do that perfectly for you. So now they're all filling our little 1,000 pixel container perfectly because we put them all in auto. We can also use the shorthand for this. Instead of writing auto 3 times, there's a shorthand way to do it. Like everything in CSS basically has a shorthand way of doing it. So the shorthand, and this is how I usually do my grid columns and stuff, is I do the shorthand way. It's called the repeat property. So you can say repeat, and then you can put 3 because we have 3 items right now, auto. So all 3 of them auto, and it'll be the same thing. So that's shorthand. Okay. The most common way though to do grid template columns is going to be with fractions or FRs. So I'll copy this and I'll show you what I mean here. And I usually use fractions. When I'm doing my grid stuff, I usually do grid template columns, repeat, and then I use fractions. So instead of auto, you can put like 1 FR, and it's the same thing basically. It's just saying like one one fraction of the total page, so it still divides it up into 3 equal fractions, and they're still autoed by that. But you could do other stuff, like say we weren't doing repeat, you could do like 1FR, 2FR, 1FR, so the middle one again would stretch. Okay, so those are the FR means fraction. It's like short for fraction, and it's pretty common in when you use grid. You'll see people that use FRs instead. So we could, we can do anything. We do 3FR in the last one and 1FR on this one. That'll change it. So now the third one is stretching 3 fractions, and then these two just get 1 each. So those are fractions. So we'll go ahead now. So that's just the basics of the grid. So we can even put like a heading over this if we wanted to. Say like grid basics. And again, I would just follow along with me, guys, and even comment the stuff out and save the comments. Just do exactly what I'm doing, because there'll be a time when if you want to know what to do, you'll either come back to the video or you can look at your own code and just kind of know what we did. Really helpful to leave the comments there. But we can go down now here, and I'll show you how you can use grid to make like a little mini layout really easily. So we'll go below all this. We'll copy some of this though, and we'll make like a mini little layout here. So I'll keep the container, but I'm gonna get rid of everything else. We'll keep the H2. Actually, no, I'm gonna get rid of the H2. These H2s are ugly. I don't feel like styling them. Doesn't really matter though. As long as you can look at the code, you should know what's going on. So class container, right? And let's make like a little mini section. I will put a comment here though. So let's do comments instead of the headings. Let's say grid basics. And to make an HTML comment, guys, I'm just hitting shift and typing command or control on a PC keyboard. Hold that and then just type a question mark. That'll give you a HTML comment. So we'll say mini layout with grid. Okay. So again, I'm going to keep that container class because I just like containers that make the page look pretty. And we'll pretend like we're making a section of a website or a web page here. I'll put like a main tag, a little semantic tag. I'll put a section. And then within the section, I'll put an H3, and I'll just put like, welcome to the website. Okay. And then put a paragraph. We'll do 30 words of lorem ipsum placeholder text. So I'll just put lorem 30 and then hit the tab button if you're on Visual Studio Code. And then below the section, we'll put what's called an aside. And the aside tag is usually used for like stuff on the side, like a sidebar. Okay. So we'll do P lorem 15. Okay. So there's a little aside there. And then we will go up and we will style this up. So let's go back to our CSS. And I'll put mini layout styles. I always like to put comments for my CSS code so I know where stuff starts and stops really easily. So for our main section, that main tag, we're going to go display, and we're going to go grid again. So now it's grid. So when you just do display grid on its own, guys, it doesn't do anything. But behind the scenes, it tells the browser like, all right, we're going to do some grid stuff, so get ready. But it doesn't do anything on its own. So we'll do grid template columns, and we'll use our fractions. We'll say 2FR for the first one, which is the main content, and then we'll say 1FR for the second one, which is the aside content. So the 2FR is the main content because in our HTML, that the main section is the first thing. So that's how it knows it's first, because it's first on the HTML page, and HTML is read from the top down. Okay, and then it knows the aside is second because it's below that one. Okay, so in case that's confusing. So there we go. And then we'll do margin 10 rem top and bottom, 0 left and right, just to bring that down. And we'll add some. So I'll show you what we have so far. As you can see, we kind of have like a little layout now. See that? So we have like this is common on like a lot of blog pages. You'll have like blog content and articles and then like a sidebar. A lot of most WordPress like themes use that. So that's how fast you can create that layout. Like back in the day, you would have had to do like floats and then a bunch of other code just to achieve that. And then Grid just lets you do it with what? Couple lines, couple little properties added in. It's pretty cool. But to further demonstrate that, we'll add some styles to the section part. So I'll just say border 1 pick solid, and we'll do that same dark gray color, and then we'll give it a background color just like our other ones. Do the F4, and then let's give it a height of like 400 pixels. Okay, so there you go. Now you can see it better. And then we'll copy this down and we'll put the same styles for our aside. Bam, now they both have it. So let's see what that looks like now. That's good. Could add padding. Let's make them look a little prettier. So just say padding all around 1 rem for the content in there. Cool. And now I'm going to show you, so there it is. And now I'm going to show you how to, like, let's say like on a normal website, there would be some space in between these. They wouldn't be like maybe connected like that. So there's another property in Grid that you can use to separate those, and it's just called gap. It used to be called grid gap, but now it's just gap. They deprecated or got rid of grid gap, and now it's just same thing for Flexbox. I think it used to be flex gap, and now it's just gaps. So if you're using grid or Flexbox, you can use gap to spread your elements out that are in the container of the flex or grid container that you're using. And let's just say 1 rem gap. There it is. See how they separated? Now there's some separation there, and we don't have to use margins or paddings or anything, and just really simple. So that's how you can make like a little content and sidebar. So that's pretty cool. Another great thing that Grid does. I can show you now. There's also, so we've been working with Grid template columns, but there's also Grid template rows. So I'll show you that. So let's go below all this. We'll say Grid template rows. And we'll do our container class again. And then our div will have we'll call this one grid row container. And then we'll just say, we'll have a div called grid row item. Say item 1. Okay. And then I'm just going to copy these down. Say 1, item 2, item 3. See what we got here. Are they here? They're here. Cool. Now we'll add some styling to them again, and then I'll show you what that does. So let's go back to our styles. Up here, we'll say grid row container. And on our grid row container, again, we'll say display grid. Tell the browser in the background we're about to do some grid stuff, even though it's not going to do anything. And then we'll say this property is different now, so it's grid template rows. Okay. So before we've been doing grid template columns, now we're doing rows. So we'll do grid template rows, and then we'll say 1FR, 2FR, 1FR again. And then we'll give it some styling so we can actually see what that just did. But I think you should be able to guess what that's going to do here. Take a guess. See if you know what it's going to do before we do anything. We'll give this some margin again. And then We'll go to our grid row items and give them the same styling that we've been given everything, all the other items that we've been doing. So I think it's this styling right here. No, actually, we don't want to give it a height, so it's this one. Copy all those styles down. It's a great thing about code is you can always copy and reuse. That's why we like to code, right? We are lazy people. And here's our grid row items. So these ones stack. They don't go side by side. So they stack on top of each other. That's the difference. And it's important that you can do grid row items and grid row columns because, as I'm going to show you pretty soon here, we can combine those two concepts to make the complex designs. And then there's other code that we can write so that they can span over across, like one of these can span several areas and make different shapes. And that's how you get those complex designs that I showed you on like wayfair.com in the beginning. That's how you do those. So just know that those are grid rows, okay, for now. And then we're going to do... we're going to combine now. We'll make another section and we'll combine grid row templates and grid row columns to make a two-dimensional like layout that's a little more complicated. So I'm going to copy this comment here. And this is going to be called, we'll say, combine grid rows and columns to make 2D layout. Okay. So again, we're going to start with our container class. Let me get this, bring this down a little bit more. I like to space my code out a lot, so it's super easy to read. And then our next class we'll just call, oops. We'll call our next class combined grid container, since we're combining two properties together. You always want to make your classes and IDs or whatever like super descriptive, even if they're a little bit long. It should describe exactly what you're doing. We'll call our items combined items. Say item 1 again. And then we'll make like 6 of this one. Okay. And then we'll just go 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. And then we'll go back up and we will make some styles again. So this is the combined grid container. So I'm just going to copy that and we'll select it with the class here. I forgot to put comment here. Grid row styles. Then we'll go here and we'll say combined grid. What the heck? This keyboard, man, I got this keyboard. I'm still not used to it. Say grid, row, and column combined. All right. And then let's select our combined grid container class. And we'll say display grid. And then we'll do I'm going to do the margin first. Say 10 rem, 0 rem. I'm going to leave it like that for now. I'm not going to do the other ones until we give styling to our items. So our item was combined item. So we'll just go copy that. Say dot combined item. And then it's all the same code that we've been giving to our other items. So let's do this. And you normally don't want to do this kind of stuff, guys, or you just keep copying the same kind of code down everywhere. But just for the purpose of this lesson, I'm like renaming stuff, different stuff, just to make the concept more obvious. So yeah, you don't want to do this on a real website. Don't have different classes with the same styles. That's terrible practice. But if you've been following my courses, you know that by now. But this is just to help you guys know what's going on. Making everything separate. I'm trying to make like basically separate little lessons into one, right? But so here's our items so far. They're all styled up and nice. We haven't done anything yet as far as the grid goes, but we'll go back up here And now we're going to use columns and rows together, okay? So let's just say like grid template columns, and we'll use our repeat property, and we'll say repeat 2 and say 1FR. See what that does. Okay. So there we go. Now they're all side by side. We set only 2 per column, and then they stacked on top of each other by default because there's only 2, and they filled up our whole container because we didn't specify otherwise. So that looks good. So again, just that little line of code gave us that. So that's pretty cool. Like again, that would take a lot more. It would be a lot harder to do if grid wasn't around. So there's grid template columns, and then let's add some grid template rows to make this a little more complicated. So we'll say grid template rows, and then let's do 1FR, 2FR, 3FR. Using fractions again. See what that does. And see what that did. So we said 1FR, 2FR, 3FR. It just made them a little bit bigger. So yeah, that's just to demonstrate, like what we can do. So stuff like that is kind of how they made that the more complicated website, like the more complicated designs like this website. This website, this Wayfair website has grid stuff all over it. This is they're probably using some kind of framework, but you wouldn't be able to do something like this you could back in the day, but it would just be so much code to do stuff like this. But you see how they have like a slider here. Website broke. They have like a slider here, and then they have this other stuff. So they spanned this. This is called spanning. They spanned this first area, multiple rows, and then they used FRs to. But this is probably like 1FR, 1FR, and then like 4FR or something like that. I don't know their exact code on here. I'm not going to look at it, but if we can just tell they used grid from what we've been doing to achieve this. So again, whenever you come to a design that has something like this for you to build, just know in your head like, oh, I'm going to be doing some CSS grid. And then if you don't use grid a lot and you come back to videos like this one and just refresh your memory. But let's we'll make one more little lesson here, and I'll show you how to do that spanning so you can create like this kind of a design. This is actually the funnest part. This is the coolest part of grid, is spanning rows and columns and stuff and creating like really fun little designs. So let's go here and we'll go back into our code down to the HTML. This will be the last thing we do in this one, guys. But like I said, this is the coolest. So we'll say spanning rows and columns with grid. Okay. And this can get a little complicated, but I'm going to show you like the easiest way to write it. But this is probably like the most complex part of grid is this stuff like that I'm about to show you. So say dot container, and then we'll give our inner thing, we'll call it span grid container, because we want to be descriptive of what we're going to do with that container. And then we'll call these span items, I guess. And let's item 1. Okay. So let's just go make a ton of items. Make like 16 items just to get the point across here. And I know there's like shortcuts to do all this stuff in VS Code, but I'm too lazy to look it up. You can do like a multiplication sign and like make all these instantly, but I never use that in like practical situations when I'm coding, so I don't really keep all the shortcuts up in my head. So I know that somebody in the comments might be like, "Oh, why are you doing it that way?" But that's why, because I'm lazy. But anyway, all right. So we have 16 items here. There they are. I haven't styled them up yet, so let's go add some styles to our items, and I'll show you how to span stuff and make really cool, super complex looking designs that only take a couple lines of code because we're using the power of grid. So we'll go down here and make a comment, and we'll just call this spanning styles. I guess. They're spanning rows and columns styles. Yeah. And then what did we call our items here? Span items. So let's copy this. Should always copy when you can. Prevent typos. And it's going to be the same as this. There we go. There's our items. All 16 of them. And then we called that the span container or something like that. Let's see. Span grid container. And we'll put this above here. Display grid. Do our margins. Okay. There we go. I got some margin. And then we'll do some magic here. So what we'll do is I'm going to grab, well, let's do this first. So we have span grid container. We'll do grid template columns. And we'll say, we'll use the repeat. And we'll say for 1FR. Okay. So we did 4, we said 4 in each little row. Because we used 4 1FR, okay, and we use repeat. So remember that. It says repeat. I want 4 in each row, and they each take up 1FR. So that's why that gave us that. Cool. And then we're gonna select one of these boxes, and rather than put a class on like one of them to select it, I'm just gonna use like a pseudo selector. We'll use the first child pseudo selector. So we'll say dot span item, whoops, dot span item, and then we'll colon, and we'll say first child. And that means first child, so it means give me the first div in that grid container, which is item 1. So we're selecting this one by just saying the first child. Okay. If that's too confusing with you, you can just add a class to stuff. You don't got to use pseudo selectors. Add another class and select it that way. Totally fine. Make your code as readable and as simple as you can for you to understand it. Don't try to write complicated stuff that you don't get just to impress random nerds online or anybody. If you work with a bunch of nerds that like to be know-it-alls, like don't listen to them. Make your stuff super simple. All right, so I'm gonna have this this number 1, I'm going to write some code to make it span out to like here and take up like most of the space and then push everything else over. So to do that, I'll show you 2 ways. I'll show you the long way, which is the way that I use, even though it's more code because it makes more sense in my head. And then I'll show you the shorthand way that I don't use because it doesn't make sense in my head, but you can use it. Okay. So I want to be really transparent. Like some things just don't make sense to me, so I don't do them when it comes to shorthand. And it's just the best way to go when you're coding. So again, don't try to impress people. Do what works for you. But so we're going to say grid column start. Because so remember, we selected this with first child, this item 1. Say grid column start. And we'll say start at 1. And then we'll say grid column end. Grid column end. Here it is. And let's end at 4. So we see what that did. So here we said start at 1, end at 4, and I'll show you what that means. So it means start at 1 and then span over 4. So it might look like it's only spanning over 3, but that's not what we count. We actually count the lines starting with the very outside line. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Got it? Okay. So that's why it's 4 and not 3. So again, start here, 1, 2, 3, 4. I know, it's confusing, but that's what that means. And then we can also use, we can combine row with that as well. So let's say grid row start and 1, and we'll say grid row end, grid row end, and we could say 3. Boom. So remember rows that go up and down, right? So we started at 1 and went down 3. So 1, 2, 3. And that's how you would make like a complicated design. And then of course you could, if you wanted to like separate stuff out like it was like a real layout, you could just use that gap and say like 8 pixels, so everything spreads out. And then what do we have here? So like, what is this mirror? What is this mirror? This mirror's like this website, right? That's how they did it. They just spanned, right, guys? Pretty simple too. Like they just made this one thing bigger than everything else. It's like pretty much the same size. So that's pretty cool. So actually, like if we were to look at this, like this would be like 2FR. These are 1FRs, and this is like a 4FR for using our fractions with how big this thing is. So, but that's how you do it. That's how you make these complex layouts that look like super complex. Like this right here looks like a news website because there's usually like a big headline with the main article. Sometimes this is like a slider with JavaScript or PHP. You can make a slider so it slides to different articles. And then a lot of blog websites, like news ones, they'll have like all the other articles around it, like here. This is like literally a news website in like a couple lines of code. So again, that's the power of grid, and that's why it's so cool. I said, so that's the longhand way of writing it, and this is how I write it when I do my code. There's also a short way, so I'm going to comment this out, and I'll show you the shorthand way if you want to use that way and it makes sense to you. So the shorthand way, you just say grid column 1, and then backslash, and then say span 3. Okay, so there, did the same thing again. And then you'd say grid row. And then you'd say 1/span 2. Boom. And then now we have the same thing. This makes more sense to me, even though it's longer hand than this. This really doesn't make much sense to me. So again, if that makes perfect sense to you, then go for it and use the shorthand. But I'm a longhand guy. Even when I write, like when I do my programming in JavaScript and stuff, I write out more lines of code a lot of times because just my brain just works in a very step-by-step fashion, and I don't like shortcuts. Like my brain just breaks. So again, shorthand, longhand, do whatever you want to do. Like of course I'll use shorthand for like the border property because that makes sense to me. I don't need to write border color, border size, and all that. I'll just do the shorthand there. But when stuff gets complicated, guys, keep it simple. Always keep your code simple so that a child could follow it if they knew how to code, right? But yeah, I think that's all we're gonna do here for grids, guys. This is all the basic concepts that you need to know of grids. You can see now like how these like more complex websites are created really easily by using grid. And like a lot of like frameworks like Bootstrap, the reason that people used to use frameworks, if you've ever heard of the framework called Bootstrap, and other developers like reference it all the time, or at least they used to. The reason that CSS frameworks were so popular like 5-6 years ago was because they had built-in grid systems like this. It wasn't using CSS grid, but they had their own like little proprietary grid system. And if you learned it, you could also make complex designs pretty easily with it. But CSS finally just built grid into itself like natively, and now we can just use grid. And then remember, we checked the website, we checked this one earlier, and the biggest problem with grid was it wasn't supported on all browsers, but now it is. So like I said, you're good to go now, man. Go ahead, use grid. The only thing is, like, if you're developing a website for some kind of population of people that use Internet Explorer, like sometimes really old people still use like obsolete stuff, or they don't update their stuff. So if you're developing a website for like, I don't know, a nursing home maybe that like old people would be using, maybe don't use grid. But those are stuff that you have to take into consideration. But man, pretty much you're good to go now. You can use grid on anything. So that's going to be it for this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're a grid expert now. And this will be one to bookmark for when you have to build something more complex that uses grid. This will help you out a lot. All right, guys, I'll see you in the next video.